Okay. Hello and welcome back for part 5 of Gardening in a Changing Climate. Again, my name is Steve Savage, if you haven't been with us before, and I'll be your host and guide for this final part of our journey. In part 4, we looked at the consequences of proceeding as usual. Now in part 5, we will look at the part that reflects our title and probably the one you've been waiting for. We are going to look at some governmental actions, as you can see on the screen, that will help to mitigate the forthcoming climate changes, and at some new technology which, if it proves out, will also reduce carbon dioxide emissions. But the bulk of part 5 will be spent on individual actions, what you and I and we can do. Individual actions are actually, I've split them into 2 parts. The first part revolves around gardening, farming, ranching, and that sort of thing. And the second part then are just generalized areas around our homes and everyday lives, of things that we can do. So welcome aboard and let's get started. And I will tell you this part is going to be at least an hour and a half, maybe a little bit longer, because I didn't want to do a part 6, so I crammed everything into here. So with that then, we've been on a really long journey from a look at the essentials of life to how the Earth regulates its climate by controlling the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere through plate tectonics, volcanism, the rock cycle, and the formation and breakup of continents, to the effect of Earth's orbit on and inclination upon climate. From there, we looked at the more depressing aspects of the last 560 million years of life on Earth, the 5 major mass extinctions that have occurred over those 560 million years, and how current conditions and trends parallel some of the factors that caused those extinctions. Finally, we explored an even more depressing picture of what could happen to Earth if we continue our current practice of repeating the carbon dioxide experiment and using the atmosphere as a worldwide garbage can. I hope, through this journey that you have seen how interrelated the Earth's systems are and how changing or disrupting one system can set up a whole series of changes in other systems. I wanted you to see that what is happening today is not something new, but is a replay of events that have happened many times before. That was the whole point. Bad things have happened before when Earth's control mechanisms were disrupted by natural causes, and will likely happen again if and when we disrupt those mechanisms. Remember, at the beginning I said that in order to know where you're going, you have to know where you've been. Well, we sure as heck know where we have been, and it wasn't a very pretty picture. Let's hope where we are going can improve on where we have been. For our closing section then, once again, and the one the course title reflects, let's turn to a more positive, more upbeat vision of what we can do collectively, governmentally, individually, to reverse or at least moderate those dark predictions and preserve the Earth as we know it today. Here are 7 things government can do to slow climate change. They're not all inclusive. They're just the start. And I see there's only 6 there because the second one down is actually 2. Okay, so there are 7, trust me. So the first thing then is just let nature resolve the problem. We must cut about 30 gigatons, and remember 1 gigaton is 1 billion metric tons, a year of carbon emissions by 2030 if we are to keep global temperature increase below 2 degrees Celsius, which is 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Nature can reduce about 1/3 of the emissions needed to hit that goal if countries invest in carbon storing forests, grasslands, wetlands, and farms. The ability of nature to solve problems just doesn't get enough attention. And I think we talked about nature in the last part towards the end in one of those quotes. There are 3 actions government can take to help nature help us. The first is simply keeping nature intact, to absorb carbon from the atmosphere. That means letting tropical forest stands, or mid-latitude forest stands for that matter, and leaving coastal marshes undeveloped. The vegetation will keep on growing and storing carbon. The second strategy centers on managing working lands, such as farms, ranches, timberlands, with carbon in mind. And we'll see and talk more about this a little later on. The third strategy is to restore systems that have been damaged or destroyed, replanting forests, as well as restoring grasslands, wetlands, and coastal mangroves, and even seagrasses, again, to help store carbon. Recent studies show that restoring coastal marshes is a far more effective at reducing the effects of storm surge from hurricanes and tropical storms than our seawalls. The marshes absorb the energy of the storm surge and dissipate it, whereas seawalls are vulnerable to collapse or overtopping. So the marshes help mitigate the effects of those storms, and at the same time, they're storing carbon. So we get a double whammy out of that. The trifecta then is keeping nature intact, managing, and restoring. We'll see these elements repeated as we look at the other areas in this section. The next one is move from fossil fuels to renewable fuels, and there's one that's called EROI, or energy return on investment, and the other one is move from fossil fuels to renewable energy, energy sprawl. And I am going to skip those. Just in the order of saving some time. And if you would like to read about those, again, you can go to the text and you can read those for yourself if you're interested. So let's look at the next one down there, which is responsible forests and water practices. And the first one, number one under there, is clear cutting. We need to limit clear cutting. We don't need to eliminate it. We just need to limit it. When forests and grasslands in the upper reaches of a watershed are cleared, it increases erosion and sediment. That sediment must be filtered out for domestic use. It settles in reservoirs, reducing their water holding capacity. And you don't have to go far to see that. Just go right down Highway 50 and go over to Folsom Lake. When that was built, I think it was the mid-50s when it finally opened up, it had a capacity of 1 million acre feet. 60 years or 65 years, whatever it is later, it has a capacity of 900,000 acre feet. We've lost 100,000 acre feet, and that's all due to sedimentation. In another 300 years or so, assuming we're all still around then, it won't be Folsom Lake anymore. It'll be Folsom Meadow. Denuded watersheds lose their capacity to absorb and slowly release rainwater, leading to that erosion, mudslides, and leaving less water to recharge aquifers because it runs off too fast before it can actually soak in. When forest lands are clear cut for lumber production, agricultural purposes, or development, runoff from farms, roads, buildings, all that stuff pollutes water supplies and washes those nutrient-rich sediments, if I can say it, into lakes and the ocean. And of course, we know where that goes. We've seen what happens many times before. So limiting clear cutting then retains cool, shaded areas for fish habitat and reproduction, and most important of all, a healthy forest acts as a carbon dioxide sink, soaking up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and sequestering in the trees. Remember we said the average tree soaked up about 48 pounds of carbon dioxide per year. I added something into here now because I just looking around at all the smoke and all the forest fires burning, everything else, and I don't think I brought it up before. I told you I would give you only scientific-based information. I think I have. Right now, I'm not, okay? I am going to give you my opinion, and it is only my opinion, and you can take it for whatever you think it's worth, absolutely nothing or whatever. So with the forest fires that are raging in California, Oregon, Washington, again, let me offer this observation and be clear again, this is my opinion only. I believe the coniferous forests in the Sierra and the Cascades are ultimately doomed. Coniferous forests are moving farther north in Canada in response to actually warming conditions in the Canadian Arctic and subarctic areas. So what used to be the end of the tree line now is moving farther north. Warmer, but in warmer and drier conditions in the Sierra and Cascades, however, will lead to tree death from drought, beetle infestations, and as well as it will just be too hot for those trees to survive. Most of them then will be consumed in ever larger forest fires. And I'm not talking about next week, next month, next year, but over a period of time. What's going to replace them? I haven't got a clue. Perhaps some mixture of hardwood forests and grasslands? Only time will tell. And so that's the end of my opinion. And again, you can take that for whatever you think it's worth, probably absolutely nothing. So number 2 then, practicing healthy harvesting. And again, within this scope of healthy harvesting practices, the big job is not deciding what trees to cut down, but which ones to leave standing. Cutting down the most valuable trees with no thought can make it harder for the forest to regrow. The problem is what will repopulate the forest. Maybe something you don't want. We're already seeing star thistle, for example, moving to higher elevations. In a mixed forest, the practice can lead to a loss of diversity. Remember that, speciation? By leaving trees of different ages and species, regrowth is facilitated and a mix of species is maintained. Let's talk a little bit then about water policy. We need to get past the idea that water policy is an either-or choice between people and nature, agriculture and fish. Appeals to the emotions don't solve that problem and just create walls between different groups. It doesn't have to be. We can have multiple uses of water and have those uses be sustainable. What it does take is cooperation. Diverse groups working together to find areas of agreement and compromise, and science-based solutions. What is not needed or helpful is false claims and appeals to the emotions. How about managing water use? There's a strong need to modernize our water use management. We can modernize agricultural irrigation systems and carefully apply both water and fertilizer when and as needed to have the greatest impact on crop growth and reproduction. This assures then that the water and the fertilizer is used beneficially and reduces, in the case of fertilizer, percolation to aquifers, as well as reducing runoff of nutrient-rich water. We can build stormwater retention basins to catch and hold rainwater to slow runoff and allow aquifer recharge. We can establish water banks, paying rights holders to leave water in streams and rivers at critical times for fish, or leave it in the ground. Water rights can be shared or sold to move excess water to areas that are having a shortfall. We can flood fallow fields to provide feeding areas for migrating birds and get the double whammy out of that as it helps to recharge the aquifers once again. How about preserving and creating wetlands? That could be a powerful tool, not only improving water quality, but also in increasing water supply. Another benefit is in reducing fertilizer runoff. Wetlands are very effective at reducing nitrate levels, particularly orthophosphorus levels in runoff into, again, streams, lakes, and onto the ocean. And again, that's important because we've seen what that does. Wetland size at about 3% of the nearby farm fields reduce nitrates washing into rivers by about 12 to 24%, somewhere in that range. Wetland size 6% of the farm fields produces a nitrate reduction of somewhere between 36 and 44%. So we can protect our water supplies, aquifers, and surface waters from nitrate pollution by, again, restoring forests, using water-efficient irrigation methods, keeping cattle out of streams, and by using terraces and stream buffers to reduce erosion. Using these methods is a heck of a lot cheaper than filtration and treatment, and better for the environment, and it makes agriculture more sustainable. How about increasing electrification of transportation? Increasing that electrification then of all types of transportation can reduce carbon dioxide input into the atmosphere through the burning of fossil fuels, which would seem obvious. But carbon dioxide reduction is dependent upon how that electricity is generated. If it's generated by burning fossil fuels, there is no reduction in carbon dioxide emissions. And in fact, they might actually increase because now people are driving their electric cars around thinking, boy, I'm not putting any carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and they drive more. But the electricity generated to charge those batteries in their cars is burning fossil fuels. Only electricity generated by renewable means results in any meaningful carbon dioxide reduction. Let's talk a little bit then about cap and trade, the last one. And here we're talking about something called the California model, because California was the one that kind of got this whole thing started and originally initiated the thing. So cap and trade then sets overall limits on greenhouse gas emissions. That's the cap. Credits are given to industry for carbon dioxide emissions. And if you don't need them, you can sell them to someone else who does. That's the trade. The number of credits is reduced by 3% each year. So what's the impact of that? Well, so far it's been a good tool to address climate change. Its effects are not just limited to California, but are having an impact throughout the US and Canada. Much of that impact is on forests, where it's catalyzing conservation programs across the US. Used properly, it can generate economic benefits to grow economies and provide cash to restore still more forests. Forest restoration then aids the fight to reduce carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere. In fact, some funds from these projects have been used to purchase coal rights in order to retire them, meaning that coal stays in the ground and is never burned to release more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The program encourages better forest management for their carbon value. So the question might be then, hey, is there a better way? Well, here is the problem with cap and trade. Give you a scenario here. If I have 100 credits to emit carbon each year, but I need only 60, I can sell the remaining 40. Meanwhile, if someone else is producing 140 units of carbon, but has only 100 credits, they can buy my 40 excess credits and go right on releasing their 140 units of carbon into the atmosphere, and there is no net reduction of carbon release. Eventually, the annual 3% reduction of credits will reduce carbon releases, but it's pretty slow. Buying forest credits in existing forests also produces no net gain in carbon pollution reduction, as the forest was already there soaking up carbon. Yes, it will continue to grow, and as it gets bigger, it will absorb still more carbon, but again, that's a pretty slow process. And meanwhile, your credit purchase allows you to keep dumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And I think your dumping is far ahead of the rate of growth of the forest to absorb. Only if the purchase prevents a forest from being clear-cut or results in planting of a new forest is there any net carbon reduction. So some environmentalists then are arguing for a better, quicker way to reduce carbon. And it's called a carbon tax. Oh my God, I've just said it, tax. Nobody likes taxes. I don't like taxes. I pay a lot of taxes, and I get it, okay? But we have to realize something here in this world. The government really doesn't have any money of its own. The only money it has is what it takes from you in the form of taxes, and then hopefully it applies that money to things that are beneficial to all of us. So paying taxes is kind of like it's just a necessary evil. So let me give you something. If carbon is taxed at $10 a ton, and I emit 1,000 tons per year, it costs me $10,000 a year to pollute. Hey, no problem. Just a cost of doing business, right? But if I produce 1 million tons per year, it costs me $10 million to pollute. Hey, now you're starting to talk real money. A carbon tax gives big polluters an incentive to reduce their emissions as quickly as possible. And again, let me give you an example. The United Kingdom imposed a carbon tax, which in 2018, at least, was about $25 a ton. And they primarily put that on fossil fuel power plants. It cut carbon emissions in half from 2015 to 2016. You see, corporations are reluctant to invest in carbon dioxide removal technologies because they see no market value in it. To them, the climate is a public benefit, not something from which they can earn a profit. It's easier and cheaper just to use the atmosphere as a garbage can. So we have two slides coming up here. I'll leave this on for just a minute so you can read it. It talks about what we're going to talk about in more detail in individual actions, okay? So while it's easy to succumb to this woe is me attitude and become depressed, there are numerous things individuals can do to help in this battle against climate change. Yeah, the efforts of any one individual have virtually zero impact on the climate. But if the efforts of thousands or millions will, or even in the case, remember, of the Mono Lake Committee, where probably just less than 100 people had this tremendous impact in saving Mono Lake. That's the goal. You can go down to, there's a website called Drawdown, I think it's drawdown.com or something like that. I'll give it to you in just a minute. In fact, maybe it's on the next slide. Yeah, it is on the bottom of the next slide, drawdown.org. You can go to that, and it gives, I think it has about 100 and some odd ideas for how people can reduce their carbon input to the atmosphere. I have a couple of them included in here, but you can go find a whole lot more. So again, this slide and the next end, just some of the things that we as individuals can do to help reduce carbon dioxide emissions, store carbon dioxide in the soil or in plant tissues, reduce water pollution and runoff, prevent ocean pollution, algae blooms, anoxic conditions, and so on and so forth. So global warming, if you haven't got it by now, will produce many changes in our climate, and for gardeners and for ranchers and for farmers in how we grow and manage our gardens. Climate zones are moving northward and to higher elevations. Our sunset zone 7 or 9 may become more like Tucson's 12 or Phoenix's zone 13. Growing season is lengthening. All across the U.S., spring blooms occur earlier, fall lasts longer, and migration patterns are changing. Animals are responding by moving their ranges north or to higher elevations. And as I just said in my opinion piece, we may soon see a shift in forest patterns as well, as our coniferous forests shift further northward or farther northward. In our own area, the change will be to a hotter and drier climate. Summers will become longer and much hotter, while winter rains will be more variable and unreliable, shifting from winters of drought to those of heavy deluges. Again, we may wind up looking more like Phoenix over the next 15 years. And I lived in Phoenix and I gardened there, so what I'm telling you is kind of what I did. We will plant vegetables in the fall and early spring, taking advantage of the more or less warmer winter and early spring months before it gets too hot. Like about in June, it starts getting really blistering down there. So the winter vegetables and even spring vegetables then planted in the fall and the early spring, while heat lovers such as corn, melons, and so forth, tomatoes, will be planted in the late winter so that they mature again before we get into June or too far into June and the summer really gets blisteringly hot. Summer temperatures here may well average 107 degrees Fahrenheit, and we may see spikes up to 120 degrees Fahrenheit in the coming decades. Some crops require a certain amount of hours during winter in which the temperature has to be below a certain temperature. Apples are an important crop in El Dorado County and in our home gardens as well, which require these lower temperatures in the winter. They're called chilling hours. Different varieties have different requirements. With warming temperatures, the number of chilling hours will likely lessen, which may require a change in varieties to some that require fewer chilling hours. So you may wind up having to pull your apple trees out. I can see it up on Apple Hill now, and switch from apple trees that require 800, 900, maybe 1,500 chilling hours down to something that maybe requires only 5, 6, 700 chilling hours in order to get a decent crop. Frost and freeze damage will become a greater threat to crops as early springs and warm weather encourage plants to begin to grow, bloom, or set earlier, or they encourage you to plant your plants out. Those early warm spells can then be followed by a return of winter storms, bringing frosts and freezing temperatures or heavy rain or snow, as remember that more erratic jet stream produces sharp ridges and deep troughs that can bring a succession of warm and cold periods. So it sucks you in with a warm period and then drops you into a cold period. Probably even more of a problem in the Midwest than it is here. So the following topics then give us some direction in how to cope with these changes and how to prevent, maybe, or mitigate some of them. So again, gardeners face these unprecedented times where warming trends are observed across all seasons, which introduces uncertainty around the stability of temperature averages and ranges, and this is producing changes in frost-free season length and changes in hardiness zones, which we've used for years, but now we question how confidently we can rely on them and on existing guidelines for planting and harvesting and frost-free days and chilling hours and all this stuff. The decision-making process now means attaching importance to the number and strength of extreme weather events, including those periods of excessively high temperatures, droughts, floods, heavy downpours, and these sharp peaks and troughs in the weather patterns. These changes portend danger for migrating insects and birds. Their migration cycles are timed for them to arrive in an area where food is available to support them as they proceed on their migratory journey. But if flowering and food production occurs earlier due to climate changes, the migrating species, perhaps proceeding on their normal schedule, may arrive too late. The food is already gone. That could lead to starvation and a complete disruption of migratory patterns. So the slide shows the observed increases in frost-free growing season length for the period from 1992 to 2012. There likely have been additional increases since then. Let's look at a practice that we may have to practice in the not too distant future. And in fact, you can practice it now if you want. It's called dryland farming. So what the heck is dryland farming? It's basically the production of crops without irrigation on land that experiences low average annual rainfall, or rainfall that is highly variable from year to year, or even within a given rainy season. It's most useful for areas with cool, wet seasons and warm, dry seasons, and rainfall must be at least 10 inches per year. Outside of the rainfall, it kind of sounds like us, doesn't it? Our Mediterranean climate, wet, cool, wet season, and then a warm or a hot, dry season. Except we get more than 10 inches of rain per year, at least right now we do. Dryland farming depends on making the best use of the bank of soil moisture created by winter rainfall. What can I grow in dryland farming? Actually, a fairly large number of crops, including something like grapes, tomatoes, winter squash, pumpkins, beans, sunflowers, watermelon, cantaloupes, potatoes, and also those apples. And I'm sure if you go online or start searching around, you can find even other crops that can grow in dryland farming conditions. The point is that finding the right crops for dryland production requires experimentation to see what works in your garden. So what are the techniques? Well, first of all, it's retain rainwater. Conserve and use water, and to conserve and use water effectively. It's vital to retain all the rainwater possible. Increase water absorption by improving the soil's tilth to absorb and allow, or to absorb and allow to penetrate water that falls on it. If you till or turn your soil over in the dormant season, do it when the soil is wet enough to form clods, but not too wet. You don't want it to form a clay mess. You want just to clod up. This lengthens the time it takes raindrops to break the clods down. It allows water to seep down between the clods, which improves penetration and impedes runoff. And that is what I do in my garden, okay? I take, once whatever my crops are finished, I take those plants out. I don't leave them as a residue, at least not yet. I may start doing that, but I take them out. And then anything that looks diseased, I throw in the burn pile, but everything else goes into my compost pile. I then clean up any residue, old leaves, again, because of the possible disease problems. Once I've done that, I bring in humus, put it in, try to get it at least 2 inches deep if I can. And then I take a balanced fertilizer, triple 15, and I put that, sprinkle some of that on. Now, the first 15 is the nitrogen. I put that on because the humus isn't completely broken down usually. And so you get that incorporated in the soil, and then it starts to break down. It uses nitrogen out of the soil, so you could possibly run into a nitrogen deficiency. So I put that nitrogen on there to just try to bulk that up a little bit. The second two, phosphorus and potassium, then don't dissolve well in water. The nitrogen does. So by incorporating them in the soil and letting them sit in the soil there over the winter, hopefully the winter rains will be sufficient to begin to dissolve that and again get it incorporated into the soil. So the winter rains come along. Oh, I turn that over then, of course, again, leaving it cloddy. And then the winter rains come, hopefully, and they begin to melt all that down. The water soaks in really well. And by the time spring runs around, usually what I have is the clods are dissolved. The garden soil looks a little hummocky. I take a rake out and just kind of level it out a little bit. And then I plant my seeds or my transplants or whatever it is. And it works quite effectively. And that's something you can do in your garden. So, you can also practice something called no-till gardening and just leave stubble and crop residue on the ground to decay. In that process, again, it reduces runoff. You might, in fact, I would strongly recommend that you don't plant the same crop into the beds where a similar crop was left in place, because any plant diseases that developed on that crop will still be there. And when your new crop comes up, it will immediately infect it. Sometimes you can get by 2 years safely, but I wouldn't play with it. Just plant a different crop over there. Wherever you left, bean residue or tomato residue, don't plant beans or tomatoes in that same area. You want to try not to let the soil form a crust. If you turn it over and rototill it and you create fine grains, those grades tend, as they get wet, tend to stick together. And when they do that, they then form an impenetrable crust that rainwater can't go through. So the rainwater then puddles up and then it runs off. And if you're like me, I think most of us around here, our gardens are kind of not level. They're kind of on a little bit of a downhill grade, which just worsens the problem. And which gets me to the other thing is be sure the beds are as level as possible to reduce the runoff. In case of very large slopes, you need to set the beds up perpendicular to the slope, okay? And then if it's really bad, you may actually have to terrace to try to level it out and reduce the amount of runoff. Other thing you need to do is reduce evapotranspiration, ET, okay? So plants, when you're using dryland farming, must be germinated initially under normal conditions of water and temperature, most likely in a greenhouse or perhaps in a cold frame. Only growth and maturity occur in dryland conditions. Again, preventing that water loss is your chief strategy. And so something else you need to control then is heat and wind through either shade structures or wind breaks. And that's essential because heat and wind speed up water loss from the soil through evaporation and from the plants through transpiration. So, and again, losses due to evapotranspiration, ET, must be minimized. Trees can be used, or large shrubs, to form windbreaks and also to provide shade. But care must be taken to prevent either too much shade on the crop, which can reduce your yields, or maybe prevent them totally, and to reduce root competition for the available water and nutrients. Again, loss of water, nutrients, and light can lead to a drastic reduction in your yields. In place of trees, you might look at like a lattice structure you can put up, which will provide some shade and also reduce the wind speed, and that eliminates the root competition problem. You can also use a shade cloth is another thing that can be used. Leaving a crop residue or stubble mulch or stubble or mulch can help to retain the water as well, reduce the runoff, and allow that water to soak in, which is the key. That mulch or compost can be added in the summer, again, to reduce evaporation and keep the soil temperature cool, and it can also be used to reduce weeds. And again, the idea here is to keep that water in the soil as much as possible for use by your plants. You need to eliminate the weeds because that means that the available water is going to your crop, to your plants, and not to grow weeds, so get rid of them. Fallow beds. You can leave half the crop area fallow for a year by alternating beds. And what that does then, it leaves the soil stored water from 1 year in the ground, and then you get rain the next winter, hopefully, and that gives you 2 years then worth of soil stored water for growth when you plant in that bed. And I've been toying with that idea here to leave my bed, half of my bed's fallow. I think I might try that this winter. If you do that, don't leave the ground bare in the fallowed bed. You need to either have a cover crop of some sort, or a cover of old plant stubble or something like that, or you need mulch to retain the water for the dry months. Remember, if you leave that soil bare, it's going to get very, very hot during the summer, and that's going to increase evaporation from the soil, and you're going to lose a lot of the water you're trying to store. So you need to put a good cover of some kind of mulch on top of that to keep that soil cool and keep as much of that water down there in the soil as you possibly can. What are some desirable crop characteristics then? Quick maturing, drought-resistant crops, obviously, are essential. You're going to plant fewer plants. You're going to plant them farther apart to reduce competition. Dwarf varieties are useful as they use and lose less water, and they still produce a pretty good crop. Crops that close their stomata or curl their leaves, such as corn for one, during the daylight, again, reduces water loss through transpiration. Remember, dryland farming yields will be less, but the fruits produced are generally better tasting, they're denser, and they generally pack more nutrients in each fruit. So let's look at something called regenerative agriculture. And what is that? Well, it's basically the practice of creating healthy soils. It's estimated about 50% of the carbon that was contained in Earth's soils has been lost to the atmosphere over the past centuries through agriculture. So regenerative agriculture then enhances and sustains the health of the soil by restoring its carbon content, which improves its productivity. Increasing soil carbon content by even a few percent stores huge amounts of carbon in the soil, reducing the amount of carbon released to the atmosphere while improving the soil and improving carbon or crop yield. In fact, soil stores about twice as much carbon as the atmosphere does. So increasing that storage could help to reduce carbon in the atmosphere and therefore address climate change. Healthy soils contain about 5% organic matter. It includes fungi, bacteria, protozoa, dead plant and animal material, that sort of stuff. The organisms then feed on the dead material, converting it back into its constituent parts that can then be used by living plants. In so doing, they improve the tilth of the soil, soil aeration, water holding capacity, and they keep the carbon in the soil where it's needed instead of releasing it into the atmosphere. Healthy soils also soak up precipitation and filter water gradually through loose soil. Soils low in organic matter, again, tend to form surface crusts that again shed the water, sending that your water running off into streams, lakes, or just off somewhere where you don't want it. Whereas healthy soils slow that process down and allow more water to soak in. Healthy soils require less irrigation. They can keep farmland productive and increase crop resiliency to drought. Intercropping can help by creating greater soil organism diversity. So healthy soil practices, I'm going to give you a list here, and you wouldn't have to use them all. You can pick and choose, what works best for you. No tillage is one. Diverse cover crops is another. In-farm fertility, that is no external nutrients. No pesticides or synthetic fertilizer. Multi-crop rotation, leave crop residue or stubble on the soil, and the addition of compost. So all these are healthy soil practices, and you can use them all, or one or two, whatever works for you. By practicing no-tillage gardening, then again the crop residue is left on the ground to break down, which adds carbon to the soil. Tillage, on the other hand, aerates the soil, which accelerates microbial breakdown of the organic matter, and that releases the resulting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So you decrease the amount of carbon that could be in the soil, instead making carbon dioxide out of it and putting it up into the atmosphere. And again, I will repeat, if you're going to leave old crop residue or stubble in the soil, you need to rotate your crops so you don't perpetuate the same crop diseases on the same crops. That rotation of the crops helps break the disease cycle. Using these practices increases soil carbon storage. It encourages microbial growth. It promotes roots to grow deeper. It improves nutrient uptake and water retention. It makes the plants more pest resistant, and it increases soil fertility. That's a pretty good rate of return for just practicing even a few of these regenerative agriculture practices. Cover cropping, especially with deep-rooted plants, reduces wind and water erosion, which keeps the nutrients in the soil in place. And it can help fix nitrogen in the soil if you plant the right cover crop. And if you turn that cover crop under, it adds organic matter to the soil. Healthy soils can mitigate climate change because the microbes break up carbon molecules so they bind to the soil particles, thus storing the carbon in the soil where it can be used by the plants. Also, it slows the breakdown, as we said, of carbon and release of carbon dioxide, storing it in the soil for decades or perhaps even longer than that. It's estimated that regenerative agriculture practices, if they are increased to about 1 billion acres by 2050, could reduce about 23 gigatons of carbon dioxide released to the atmosphere through sequestration and reduced emissions. So let's talk then about conservation agriculture. And I know I have trouble with regenerative agriculture, sustaining agriculture, conservation agriculture. I have trouble keeping them all straight too. Okay, so conservation agriculture is just basically an expansion of the idea of no-till agriculture, which we just talked about. So those conservation agricultural practices then embrace three basic principles. Number one is minimize soil disturbance by not tilling, but planting seeds or transplants directly into the soil. Number two, they maintain soil cover by leaving crop residues after harvesting or planting, after harvest or planting cover crops. That's another way you can do that. Again, which puts stuff in the soil and reduces runoff. And then number three is managing crop rotation by changing what is grown where, and we've talked about that. It's estimated that by using these principles, about 0.5 ton of carbon per acre per year can be sequestered. Plus, it makes the land more resilient to climate change events such as prolonged droughts and/or heavy downpours. Tree intercropping and windbreaks. Okay, so tree intercropping is just the intermingling of trees and crops, which can increase the carbon content of the soil and the productivity of the land. Windbreaks placed around homes, farm fields, or livestock areas promote energy savings as well as provide crop protection from the wind. The arrangement of trees and crops on a farmstead varies with the topography, the culture, the climate, and the crop value. But there are some common benefits which I'm going to discuss. So agricultural benefits then. Windbreaks reduce erosion and create habitats for birds and pollinators. Okay, so slow down the wind speed, you don't blow all your topsoil off. You keep it where you wanted it. Windbreaks can reduce evapotranspiration by reducing wind speeds, which reduces crop ventilation. So you're not losing so much water through transpiration. Deep-rooted trees can draw up minerals and nutrients for shallow-rooted plants. But you've got to watch out. Remember, we talked again about excessive root competition and also excessive shading. Fast-growing crops and annuals that are susceptible to being flattened by wind and rain can be protected by these lines of trees or tall shrubs, again, where they break up the wind and slow the speed down. I actually teach a lot of this in another course, which maybe one day we'll put online, or maybe one day we'll be able to get back in the classroom. We talk a lot about these things. They're called windbreaks, or they're called shelter belts also. If you're reading literature, you may see a referral to shelter belts. It's basically the same thing. Shelter belts are usually trees. Light-sensitive crops can be protected from excess sunlight, but again, watch out for excessive shading. You've got to watch that. Finally, planting fruit trees on the edge of farm fields can stabilize the soil, capture carbon, and they can increase local food production, either for your own use or you can sell the crop. What about benefits around the home and for livestock? Well, one thing is you can plant trees on your property to store carbon. That's certainly one thing. But strategically placed trees can reduce the wind, lessening home air infiltration, which can reduce home heating costs in the winter. And by shading the house in the summer, you reduce air conditioning costs because you keep the inside of the house cooler. Okay, and again, the same class I was just talking about, we talk about that and what trees to use, where they should be located, some pitfalls. We talk about all that. I don't have time for that today. Sorry. These actions, though, do reduce energy use. They save you money, and they lessen the amount of carbon dioxide put into the atmosphere. Windbreaks to shelter livestock reduce their heat loss, okay, which can reduce feed costs. If the animal is standing out there in the blazing, blasting wind, it removes the boundary layer air from around that animal, which is air which serves to insulate the animal and keep it warm. You remove it and replace it with cold air, then the animal has to replace that heat in that boundary layer, okay, which means the animal burns more energy, which means it's got to eat more food. If you can reduce that ventilation, that removal of the boundary layer, even by a little bit, the animal stays warmer, needs to generate less heat, which means it has to eat less food. You save money. Remove trees or don't plant, such as acacias or eucalyptus. They suck groundwater, as does star thistle as well. You would be surprised. On my star thistle class, I show you exactly how much groundwater star thistle uses up. And it uses it's the deep stored water in the summertime, which just keeps the plant alive in the summer, okay? So you want to eliminate that stuff, or you don't want to plant it. You also don't want to plant a eucalyptus tree close to your house, because the oils in that tree, if it ever catches fire, it's just like a blowtorch. It's estimated that 571 million acres are tree intercropped. It could reduce carbon dioxide emissions by about 17 gigatons over a period of about 30 years. How about planting an urban forest? An urban forest not only makes the environment more beautiful, it also cools the environment in summer, mitigates wind in winter, and absorbs tons of carbon dioxide and pollutants, again, acting as an offset against climate change. There is a resource online at something called Vibrant Cities Lab, that's all one word run together, vibrantcitieslab.com, that provides an urban forestry toolkit, plus guidance on how to start an urban tree planting program, how to advocate for one, and example ordinances, if you're interested in something like that. Let's look at sustainable intensification, another one of those things. It isn't immediately evident what they're talking about. So what it means, simply means, is more intensively farming land to produce more crops or livestock on the same amount of land. On a farm, sustainable intensification can improve soil management while producing larger yields. On a pasture, it involves growing more nutritious grasses, which allow more cattle to be grazed on the same amount of land. Implementing sustainable intensification then requires identifying a locale's most at-risk resources, what you're trying to protect then, water, deforestation, healthy soils, etc., then working to preserve them. Sustainable intensification allows us to produce more on the land we have rather than plowing up more grasslands or cutting down more forest, both of which reduce the ability to pull carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it in the trees or plant material and ultimately in the soil. So we can grow more than we have. We don't have to destroy more lands, more forests. Responsible use of fertilizer is another thing, and we kind of discussed this a little bit, but we want to apply fertilizer. Again, you should apply the right source of nutrients at the right time, at the right rate, and in the right place. Over-application can result in runoff into water bodies and eventually again into the ocean. We see where that leads. Or unused fertilizer may percolate into aquifers, polluting them and rendering them unusable for domestic uses. And we talked about that. Remember the San Joaquin Valley. Unused fertilizer may also volatilize, releasing harmful nitrogen compounds into the atmosphere. And I think we talked about that. And what we didn't talk about is too much fertilizer can also kill the microorganisms that help sequester carbon in the soil. Let's look then at rain gardens, gardening, basins, dry wells, and that sort of thing. And there is a class on this, by the way. I don't know if it's online yet, if it's a Zoom class or what, but there is one on this specifically. Rain garden is usually just a depression or in the soil or a basin that you create in the garden or in the landscape, which catches and holds runoff, keeps the runoff on your land instead of running down if you're in an urban environment into in urban environment where it runs into the gutters and eventually into someplace wherever it goes. Whereas it keeps it on the land, helps it to soak in. So that basin holds that water, giving it time to soak in versus running off. And the basin's holding capacity or efficiency can be enhanced by putting a dry well beneath the basin. So what is a dry well? It's basically a hole that's dug 2 feet, 5 feet deep, however deep you can get, usually at the center or the low point of the basin. You fill about the bottom third of that with sand. About the next third, you put in gravel. You cover that with a semi-permeable cover of some sort, and then you can put soil up on top of that and actually plant over it if you wish. The dry well then allows the basin to collect more water and directs it deeper into the soil, again enhancing aquifer recharge and reducing runoff because it can just store more. I have, I think, 4 or 5 basins in my yard, and I set them up so that they're kind of stepped. So when one fills up, whatever the runoff out of that one then flows into another one, which flows into another one, so on. Every one of mine has at least one dry well under it. Some have 2. My dry wells run anywhere from about 2 to maybe 3.5 feet deep, and that's from the bottom of the depression, not from the existing soil level. After that, as you probably are all well aware, living here in the foothills, you have rock problems. And you just get to the point that I can't dig any further. The rocks are just too many, too numerous, too big, too something or other. So I kind of have to stop. That semi-permeable barriers to put in there on top of the gravel, I use a weed block cloth. And I just double or triple it over, lay it across. And what you're trying to do there is catch the soil there and not let it get down into your gravel and your sand bed where it will eventually plug it up. That's the idea anyway. So again, by reducing the runoff, you get the benefit of the rainfall, while reducing the runoff of the fertilizer and the herbicides and so on and so forth into the streams. You got it. You can also plant deep-rooted plants. Those would be either deep-rooted or woody plants, which again removes more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, as the plants tend to have a longer lifespan and be more permanent. And the deeper roots tend to store the carbon deeper in the soil, where it is protected for a longer period of time. What about irrigation techniques? Talking about three things here: drip, row irrigation, and then sprinklers. Drip irrigation. That puts the water where you need it rather than watering the weeds. For a given amount of water, it soaks deeper into the root zone, which increases yield for the water used. It also reduces the humidity around the plant as compared to particularly a sprinkler system, which means that you should have less fungal disease problems on your plants because you're not getting the plants wet. You can use individual emitters for your plants, or you can use something like inline irrigation. Again, those are all discussed in that class or in my water management class, which maybe one day we'll put online or teach in person again. Okay, so and you don't have to put dozens and dozens of emitters around your tree, your shrub, whatever it is. With a drip system, what it does, it wets a very small area on the surface, but as that water sinks in, it sinks in a conical pattern. And eventually, as it gets down into the root zone, then it spreads out so that each of the emitters kind of unite. Oh, it's not necessary. You don't have to wet the whole surface around there, the whole subsurface around there. But they unite, and so the water is available for the plant. So again, a few emitters is all you really need. You don't have to cover the soil with emitters. Again, and also it reduces then erosion and loss of water due to evaporation, again, which reduces your overall water use, and it can save energy if you're pumping a well, and that in turn reduces carbon dioxide being put into the atmosphere. How about sprinkler? Most of us are not going to use row irrigation, canal irrigation, but those suffer from, again, water evaporation of the water in the canal or in the row. They also suffer by increasing the humidity around the plant, which can lead to disease problems. And then again, if you're trying to pump water not only out of the ground, but pump it into the row and pump it out of the row to someplace else, again, you have carbon dioxide issues there with putting more of it into the atmosphere. Sprinklers can cover a large area. They have a couple of problems. First of all, when they sprinkle, they break that water up into little tiny particles, which gives you more evaporation surfaces as it falls to the ground. So you lose a considerable amount of water to evaporation before the water ever hits the ground. And then once it hits the ground, you want it to be able to soak in. So you don't want to do it in the heat of the day. You want it to soak in. Otherwise, you're going to lose a lot of your water to evaporation from the soil surface before it ever soaks down. Another problem is if you put the sprinkler irrigation on too soon, too early like at night, it sits on there on the plant and doesn't evaporate. And that leaves time for any fungal spores that are on your plant. They require a certain amount of time being wet in order to germinate, and you give them plenty of time to do that so you can run into fungal problems on your plants as well. The best way to use a sprinkler system is to get a good timer, okay? You can then time it, and maybe you want it to, you could probably, the best time is probably from about 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning to maybe 10 o'clock in the morning. But if you need more time than that, maybe 2 o'clock in the morning, something like that. It still gives, you don't have that much longer to sunrise, and hopefully the wet plant material will have time to dry before the fungal spores germinate. Okay, so that's one problem. So you want to set your timers to get into that window as much as you possibly can. And then also, if you're sprinkler watering in the heat of the day, obviously you're going to lose more water to evaporation off of those droplets as they fall than you would in the cooler times in the morning. And then again, the water doesn't, once it hits the ground, doesn't have as long to sink in before it begins to evaporate from the ground surface. If you're trying to sprinkler water a slope, the best way to water plants on a slope is to use like an inline drip system or something like that. But if you're going to use a sprinkler, what you need to do is look at that slope, and before you put, you can have plants on it, but it's best just to have the bare slope before you start planting, and don't put any mulch on it. Turn your sprinkler system on, get your stopwatch out, and let it run until you see the water beginning to run off. And then you turn it off. Okay, then you also want to know how deep you want the water to go. 6 inches, 12 inches, 18 inches, what is it? So you go down with your little trowel and dig down a little ways and see how far the water soaked in. If it hasn't soaked in far enough, you wait a little while till the water has percolated down somewhat. Turn the sprinkler system on again, and then you time until you start getting runoff, turn it off, note the time, go dig down. If it hasn't gotten as far down as you need, you wait a little time again, turn it on again, and do the same thing. When you're finished with all that and you've got the water as deep as you want it to go, then you note those times, and then you program your sprinkler to mimic that. Then you can go ahead and put mulch on, or plant your plants and then put mulch on to reduce the runoff, keep the soil cool, reduce evaporation, reduce weeds, all that sort of stuff. You can also dig a little trench on the downhill side of the plant, so any runoff that does occur can be caught in that little basin to further soak water into the ground. So there's another thing you can use, which is called deficit irrigation, which is applying the absolute minimum amount of water to maintain healthy plant growth and production. Obviously, that's going to reduce water consumption and save energy. In a garden, you're going to have your absolute minimum is going to be much higher than it is going to be on a lawn. So because you want a crop, so you've got to put enough water on to give you the crop, but no more than what is enough. On a lawn, on the other hand, the deficit irrigation then means that through the summer months, your lawns are going to look really lousy because you don't care how it looks. You just want to keep the roots and the growth crown alive so that when the fall rain comes, it comes back to life and it grows. You have a nice green lawn up until late spring, early summer, and then you deficit irrigate again, with just enough water to keep it alive, but it doesn't look really great. And again, at my water management class, we go through that, and I've got some tables and stuff like that that you can use, which would help you with that if you decided to use deficit irrigation. So what about composting versus landfills? The practice of composting as opposed to sending the green waste to landfills has obvious environmental advantages, as well as producing this rich source of amendments for your garden. So you can compost on your own, and you can use like rapid composting techniques. And I believe we have a composting class. Again, I don't know if it's online, but we do have one. And it talks about hot composting and various other methods you can use. I use the let it rot composting method. I just pile it all up, and eventually it will rot. That's what I use, because I just need too much, and hot composting is too much work. I run a small farm, so I can't be out there flipping piles every darn day or every other day. So, so one thing is composting your own property. If you send composting or your green material off for like waste management here to pick it up in their recycle bins every other week, the green waste bins. If that goes into a municipal composting pile, which I hope it does with them, then A lot of communities do that. They municipally compost, and then they either give that compost back to gardeners or they sell it back to you, usually at a reduced cost. If you're going to use municipal compost, you must be very, very careful that the municipal entity that is doing the composting is doing it properly. They're hot composting because they're picking up stuff from all over the place. It could be diseased material. It could be stuff that's been sprayed with herbicides, pesticides, God knows what, okay? And that's all put into a big pile and it's composted. The heat, if they're using the proper techniques and doing it properly, should kill the organisms. It should basically break down those chemicals and everything is just fine. But if they're not doing it and they give it to you and you put it in your garden, you may be in for some really big problems. Now, the other thing is if they just take it and dump it into the landfill, then the problem is it gets buried, it breaks down anaerobically, remember that term from way back when? And it releases methane into the atmosphere, and we know methane is not good. Okay. So then the composting, if it's done correctly, reduces that methane production and release. Composting converts organic material into stable carbon while retaining water and nutrients of the original waste. The stable carbon helps retain carbon in the soil where it can be used by the plants, again, rather than releasing it into the atmosphere. What about managed grazing for you ranchers out there? There are 3 managed grazing techniques that improve the soil health, promote carbon sequestration, increase water retention, and improve forage productivity. The first is what's called improved continuous grazing, which decreases the number of animals per acre. So here you're probably going to have a large acreage, not too many animals on it, so they can't clear, strip it of all its land. So as they graze, another part of the acreage is still growing, then they'll move over and graze that. What they grazed before can grow. They don't totally destroy everything that's on the property. That's improved continuous grazing. Number 2 is something called rotational grazing, which moves the animals from pasture to pasture, allowing the pastures that have already been grazed to recover. So you pull them off of this pasture before they completely destroyed it down to the ground, move it to another pasture, and they graze that down and move it to another. The third is called adaptive multi-pasture grazing, and that shifts the animals through smaller pastures in quick succession, after which the land again is allowed to recover. So it's basically just rotational grazing, but it's using smaller pasture areas and moving the animals from pasture to pasture more quickly. Managed grazing protects natural grasslands from overgrazing and trampling, and it can sequester anywhere from 0.5 to 3 tons of carbon per acre. Let's talk about reducing food waste. 1/3 of the food grown does not make it from farm to fork. Uneaten food squanders seed, water, energy, land, and fertilizer, all of which required energy in some form to produce and releases carbon dioxide in the process. As well as clearing land to produce uneaten food just worsens the problem. Uneaten food generates greenhouse gases, including methane once again, when that uneaten food and organic matter is stuck into landfills. Food waste is responsible for about 8% of global emissions. If 50% of food waste could be reduced by 2050, we could avoid putting about 26 gigatons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Reducing food waste also, as I said, avoids deforestation and destruction of grasslands done to produce additional farmland to produce what may be uneaten food. And that would prevent an additional 44 gigatons of emissions over the next 30 years. What about adopting a plant-rich diet? The Western diet is meat-centric. I think we all know that. And as more people throughout the world move into the middle class, that diet is expanding. And it comes at a really steep price tag of producing about 1/5 of global emissions. Livestock flatulence accounts for 26% of the methane emissions in the US alone. and it's responsible for about 14.5% of greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. Yeah, for just a gee whiz, if cattle were their own nation, they would be the world's third largest greenhouse gas emitters after China and the US. Switching to a plant-based diet might be the most effective way that we as individuals can stop climate change. You don't have to become vegan. You don't have to become, strictly a vegetarian, whatever I'm trying to say here, whatever. You eat just plants. Okay. You don't have to become that. You just, all you have to do is reduce your meat consumption by some percentage, whatever is comfortable for you. Plant-rich diets could reduce global carbon dioxide emissions by 66 gigatons annually by 2050. We could also source local foods. That is, sourcing whatever grows near you when you can, or you can, that saves burning fossil fuels for transportation, whether by truck, ship, plane, whatever they use to do it. You can do that in your own garden, grow your own food in your garden if you've got the space. You can frequent local farms through plant sales and things like that. You can also you can buy local produce in your grocery store. So all those things you can use to source local foods and cut down on the transportation and the carbon dioxide emissions that are related to it. We, at our own garden, I grow a lot of I run a small farm, so we sell a lot of produce, but we also keep some for ourselves. And so for the summer months, much of our produce comes out of the garden. And my wife also processes it and freezes it. And so in the winter months, we can go out into the freezer, jerk out a jar or a can or whatever of something and bring it in and eat it. And it tastes almost as good as if we'd gone out into the garden in the summer and picked it fresh, almost. What about rooftop solar photovoltaics? The cost of individual rooftop solar installations has plummeted drastically over the past several years to where about 65 cents a watt per watt generated, I think, and it may be even lower now. This number is a little bit old. So in many areas, though, the cost now is competitive or even less costly than conventional power generation. And particularly when you get all the credits, when you buy one of these systems, you get credits. So I'm just picking numbers out of the air now. Maybe it costs you $20,000 to put the system up on your roof, but you get a $10,000 rebate from the state or from PG&E or from somebody, and maybe you get a tax credit of another 10%, whatever the number is. So that your actual cost is not $20,000. It may be only like about $5,000 or $6,000. And you can rapidly recoup that through the energy generated them, but you don't have to buy from PG&E or SMUD or whoever your provider is. So if rooftop solar grows from the current 0.4% of electricity generation, and that's a 2018 number, to 7% by 2050, we could avoid about 24.5 gigatons of carbon dioxide emissions. I do have, I have solar voltaics on my roof, and in fact, we're just putting in batteries because of all these power outages, so that I can feed that power into my batteries, and I run off the batteries. So when PG&E cuts the power off, I've still got power in the house. In the meantime, I'm generating a lot of my own energy and actually feeding it back into the grid as well. So that's something you can do, and it reduces the amount of carbon dioxide put into the atmosphere. What about electric vehicles? That could bring significant emissions reductions by switching to them. Compared to gasoline-powered vehicles, emissions drop by 50% if an EV's power comes off a conventional grid. If it's powered by solar-generated energy, those carbon dioxide emissions fall by 95%. Building insulation. Remember we talked about that a little bit about the air infiltration into your house and trying to cut the wind speed so it cuts the infiltration. Well, air infiltration accounts for 25 to 60% of the energy used to heat and cool a home. Energy that is simply wasted. And we've discussed, again, that the location of trees and cutting back the wind that cuts down that infiltration. Also, insulating a building further reduces the infiltration. Better insulating a building reduces heat exchange, it saves energy, and again, it avoids unnecessary carbon dioxide produced by generating unneeded heat. If 50% of existing residential and commercial buildings install proper insulation, a little bit more than 8 gigatons of emissions can be avoided. Some really mundane stuff now, okay? Household LED lights. LED bulbs use 90% less energy than incandescent bulbs and 50% less than compact fluorescents. About 8 gigatons of carbon dioxide emissions can be saved if 90% of household lighting switches to LEDs. Solar hot water. The use of solar hot water generated by solar systems versus conventional fuels can reduce fuel consumption by anywhere from 50 to 70%, depending, of course, on how much hot water you use. Smart thermostats can adjust the operation of cooling and heating systems to operate only when buildings are occupied. This saves energy and emissions that would otherwise be wasted heating and cooling unoccupied buildings. We have a smart thermostat. And we also have a whole house fan, and we program that smart thermostat so that now we're also on time of use electric. We got all kinds of stuff going on. So we program that smart thermostat so that in the summertime, for example, it cools the house only. First of all, we turn on the whole house fan overnight. I open up the windows. The air conditioner is actually turned off. And the windows then draw in the cool air. I get up in the morning, I shut the windows to lock that cool air in. The air conditioner is on, but it's not running then until the temperature reaches whatever temperatures I've set it at, which usually is, sometimes it doesn't reach it at all. When we get to maximum billing, because we're on time of use, about 2 in the afternoon, the air conditioner, and we set it at a higher temperature so it can't go on. It almost never does. So, and then when we get to the other end, in the evening, we go off time of the high price electricity, it's set at a lower temperature where it'll come back on, and if the house needs cooling, it will cool the house down. In the wintertime, we set the thermostat to warm the house to whatever level we set it at during the day. Again, during the peak time of use, the heater goes off. And then it comes back on in the evening to reheat the house to whatever level. And then it goes off about the time we go to bed so that we heat the house to a much lower level. And then it comes back on in the early morning, about 7 o'clock when we get up, to heat the house again. It's a way you can use a smart thermostat to save a whole lot of energy and a whole lot of carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere. Smart window glass. Windows are able to reduce the transmission of heat energy contained in sunlight into buildings. They're called low E or low emission glass. And now there's glass that automatically darkens as the sunlight strikes it and lightens as the darkness falls. It's very similar if you have transitions lenses in your glasses. It's the same idea. So it reduces the solar energy transmitted through windows in the summer, which reduces the load on your air conditioner and again saves energy and emissions. My house, when I built it, was passive solar. And then we put low E windows in, which would kind of work in counter purposes to ourselves. So, but with passive solar, then we have our window, the eaves on our house hang over so that in the summer when the sun is high, they shade the windows and the sunlight can't get in to heat the house, and then we have low E windows, which even cut it down more. In the wintertime, when the sun elevation is lower, it shines in underneath the eaves and warms the house. And we actually have a sunroom which has a solar mass in it, concrete and brick, which absorbs that heat to help heat the house as well. When we put low E glasses in, we cut down the amount of radiation coming in to heat the thermal mass. So we kind of shot ourselves in the foot. But overall, it's probably good. Okay, you can do that too. Okay, switch detergents. 90% of the energy used by your washing machine goes to warming the water. Switch to detergent formulated to work better in cold water. And you don't have to heat the water. Stop using one-use bottles and straws. Almost 460 billion, that's with a B, billion, single-use plastic bottles are purchased worldwide each year, and less than half of them are recycled. Reducing plastic bottle production reduces demand for the petroleum and natural gas needed to produce them. It reduces the energy to manufacture them, and it reduces the amount of plastic that is polluting our oceans. The same goes for plastic straws. So, here we go. Call or meet your representative. If you're concerned about the effects of emissions, fossil fuel use, and global warming on the climate, call or meet or email your representative to express those concerns and perhaps offer ideas for solutions. Let them know you are concerned and will be monitoring their actions and will be voting accordingly. Vote Climate, a U.S. political action committee, has analyzed the public position of every member of Congress, ranking them from climate zero to climate hero. Go to voteclimatepac, all one word, .org to view those ratings. Urge your governor and or mayor to join the United States Climate Alliance, and that's usclimatealliance.org, again, all one word, and the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, and that's globalcovenantofmayors.org. Join or ask your employer to join the American Sustainable Business Council, ASBcouncil.org. It advocates for legislation and other policies that address a bottom line of people, planet, and profit. Let your local Chamber of Commerce know that clean, cheap, renewable energy is good for every kind of business, creates good jobs, and should be a top priority. In fact, solar-powered jobs are now create more jobs and employ more people than conventional energy jobs. And that will probably even become more so in the future. Ask if they or the state are involved in the Transportation and Climate Initiative to improve public access to transportation while slashing carbon emissions. Do they support investing in public transportation, making electric cars more affordable, higher gas mileage standards, remember we talked about that earlier, and adding infrastructure for charging electric vehicles? Also improving high-speed internet access in rural areas to enable more people to telecommunicate. And that's been a huge one right now because more people are telecommunicating. So if more people had the capability to do that, it might even be better. Open dialogue and seek common ground. Often we find that we are talking past each other when we interact with those who are skeptical about climate change, or at least don't believe it is human caused. Most people can agree that the weather is changing. Most people, and we've had a slight problem here where my notebook fell off. So just hang on just a minute and we'll get this back where it was, okay? Unfortunately, I wasn't able to catch it. Okay, so again, most people can agree that the weather is changing. Most people are concerned and don't want to see the Earth and its environment damaged. Most people want to pass a healthy Earth on to their children and their grandchildren and so on. Find areas where you agree and work with them on those areas. You may not agree on everything, so agree to disagree where that happens and work on those areas where you can agree. A suggestion on how to talk about climate change. Start a conversation. Study shows that what we believe others think about a topic affects our own beliefs. So in other words, simply sharing your perspective may help change others' hearts and minds. Focus on shared interests. When talking to someone, start by asking open-ended questions rooted in shared interests. For example, note changes in your garden, your city, or other locations you both care about, and ask if the other person has noticed those changes too. Listen respectfully. Remember, your goal is confirmation, not confrontation and conquest. Share your perspective and listen attentively to the other person. Finally, remember, studies show that each person's brain constructs a version of reality unique to them given the inputs it receives. Your construct of reality may be very different from theirs. In fact, no two people have exactly the same reality construct or view reality in the exact same way. Take that into consideration as you discuss climate change with others, especially with those who don't share your views. Finally, volunteer, whether it be on political campaigns or just participating in local environmental projects. Every little bit helps. Remember the Mona Lake Committee. With the cooperation of and efforts of thousands of individuals, you, we can make a difference. And very quickly, let's run through the technology on the horizon. So there are some new technologies in development that may help to solve water problems as glaciers melt, potentially drying rivers, reducing their flow, or as climate patterns shift, creating drought in some areas, or to reduce the strain on aquifers. Other new technologies may reduce our reliance on fossil fuels by providing fuels and fertilizers from artificial leaves, thus creating a closed carbon dioxide cycle rather than digging and pumping more fossil fuels, burning them and releasing their carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Finally, perhaps we can create sustainable communities where power is created and shared locally, reducing the need for large power plants and lengthy transmission lines. So let's look at drawing water from the air very quickly. The ability to draw water from the air could lessen the demand on aquifers and surface water sources, as well as provide water in desert areas without the need for canals. Reduced pumping could lead to lower carbon dioxide emissions from well pumps or pumps to lift water into canals or out of the canals. There's a new material under development that can pull water from the air even with humidity as low as 20%. The system uses heat from the sun to operate. There is no electricity involved. As of 2017, the system could pull 2.8 liters of water daily per kilogram of the material. And there's ongoing efforts to try to boost that up and make it even more efficient. Fuel and fertilizer from leaves. Artificial leaves have been developed that mimic the photosynthetic process to split water into its component parts, hydrogen and oxygen, which can then be used to convert carbon dioxide drawn from the air into hydrocarbons, thus removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The process is more efficient than a natural leaf, about 10% efficient. For a natural leaf, it's only 1% efficient. Again, more work is being done on that. Finally, sustainable communities. To create more sustainable communities using solar power, there's a need to concentrate solar panels, not just on the building, but on buildings throughout the area and on open spaces and maybe over parking lots. This can allow more power to be generated on site where it is actually needed. Excess power can be stored in flywheels or perhaps in batteries, so it's available for later use, such as at night or perhaps on cloudy days. The key to much of this is the development of better, more efficient batteries to increase the storage and energy density so that we have enough power available. And work on those batteries is also progressing. Sustainable communities could reduce carbon dioxide emissions by reducing the need for fossil fuel power plants and shortening the need for and length of transmission lines. Presently, more than a quarter of U.S. emissions come from residences. So let's get to the closing. We have reached just about the end of this. I would like to give you a few closing comments, however. Here are a couple of points that are important. If you get nothing else from this class, I hope you remember them. I mentioned them several times in the past, in the presentation. First, the Earth has run the carbon dioxide experiment many times in the past, and it has always ended badly. Second, everything is fine until it isn't. Until we reach that tipping point where it's too late, we've gone over the edge, and we can't go back. Everything is fine until it isn't. So these are especially important in the light of two developments in released in July of 2018, actually, and the study suggests that global warming could be increasing at a rate faster than predicted. I think we've pretty much confirmed that. The changes seen today are much faster than anything encountered in Earth's history. The key to take away from that is not only that statement, also that in terms of rate of change, we are in uncharted territory. This is further substantiated again by the fact that July 2019, Earth had its 415th warmer than normal month in a row, and the US had its warmest 3, 4, and 5-year spans on record. The US also had its warmest month in history in July of 2019. And Part 5 is being recorded on September 15th, 2020. In news released on September 14th, 2020, it was revealed that the period June to August of 2020 produced the hottest summer on record, 2.11 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 1.2 degrees Celsius, warmer than average. August was the second hottest since the record keeping began, surpassing the 20th century average of 60.1 degrees Fahrenheit by 1.69 degrees Fahrenheit. Only August 2016 was hotter. Also, on September 14th, it was announced that the progressive disintegration of Greenland's ice shelf continued in 2020, as a huge chunk of the ice shelf in the Arctic, totaling 42.3 square miles, broke off. In 2019, Greenland lost enough ice to cover California 4 feet deep in water. The evaporation insults, or the environmental insults rather, just keep piling up with report after report after report. You couple all these occurrences then with the apparent increase in the rate of atmospheric carbon dioxide increases to 2.5 parts per million or above, and the rate of annual temperature increase to anywhere from 0.03 to 0.05 degrees Celsius per year through 2050, it would seem something is happening. Are we approaching that all-important tipping point where it becomes too late to prevent catastrophic change? Time appears to be getting short. Look out your window for the last month, and you might really draw that conclusion. It appears we have 3 choices. Okay, choice number 1 then is suffer with the changes we are creating and continue as we have been. Number 2 is adapt to the changes by changing our lifestyles, moving to a cooler climate, moving cities inland, whatever. And number 3 is mitigate by changing our current practices, reducing carbon dioxide emissions, and trying to remove accumulated carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. In the short term, it's probably going to have to be a combination of adapt and mitigate. But in the long term, we want to live in a world anywhere near what we have lived in. Mitigation is the only solution. But here's the thing, it is our choice. Whatever that choice is, we will have to live with it, perhaps for centuries. As you can see, there's a difference then between a sustainable future and a deadly collapse of the ecosystem. That future depends on decisions made by us, which in turn depends on how soon we recognize that what we are doing and take action to correct it. And again, it breaks into 2 categories: winners, who see what is happening and take action to fix it, and losers, who can't get their act together, deny what is happening, and their civilization collapses. The question becomes, which category do we choose to be in? A final note then on the acceptance of scientific truth comes from the noted physicist Max Planck. It may explain why so many people reject global warming in spite of all the evidence and insist all is well. I'm going to quote him. He says, "A new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die." I hope we are smarter than that. And we lost all the text on there it is. Okay, I don't know why that happened, but there it is. So I promised you the website to go to if you wanted to look at the presentations, the slides that is in the text. They can be found there at that site. Remember, the slides will be pretty much as you have seen. There are a few errors on them. I think I pointed those out, mainly to the not putting the proper reference on, or not putting a reference on where it should have been. The text has changed dramatically because I have left out parts of the text to make this whole thing shorter, but then I've also added in text as we went along as things changed to try to keep it up to date. So the things I've added in will not be in there. The things I left out will be. Sorry about that. So I hope you have gotten something from this class. I hope it proves useful. And I just want to say that I want to thank you ever so much for the privilege of your time. And maybe we'll see you in another class sometime in the future.